please be involved in your money. You do not need to be the person who's tapping the screen or clicking the mouse to move and transfer and do all that, but you do need to know what's going on with the money, at least a little bit. And that could be through monthly money dates. It could be just having conversations. It could be like going over your budget. Whatever you want, whatever works for you is the best, but do not kind of hands off. You manage it. It's fine. We cannot do that. I don't care who you are.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back. My name is Emily, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Plenty. At Plenty, we're building the destination for couples to manage money together. My husband and I co-founded Plenty after we began merging finances ourselves, and we're shocked to find what a mess that can be. We'd both been in Silicon Valley working in fintech for over a decade each, and so we settled to build something better. Today, Plenty is a wealth platform helping modern couples invest and plan for their future together. We bring the investment strategies and products of the wealthy to the everyday household. But we also know that, especially in relationships, it's not just about great products, it's also about the conversations. And talking about love and money is still very new. So that's what we settled to do in our podcast, to hopefully make it a little easier for everybody listening. Today, I'm very excited to bring Aja Evans to our podcast. She is a board-certified therapist, speaker, and consultant specializing in financial therapy. In addition to her practice, she has a column, Finance in Focus with Square, and is a consultant to fintech companies looking to integrate how we feel and behave with money. She has been quoted in major news outlets such as the New York Times, Bloomberg, CNBC, and NerdWallet. Coined the feel-good financial therapist, she is on a mission to get more people engaged in living their best life while tuning to their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors around money. We first spoke a couple weeks back and immediately started chatting excitedly about all the things that shape how people think about money and especially come out within relationship. So today, I'm really excited to welcome her to the show to talk about this further. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Emily. I'm excited to dive in and continue, all the good conversations that I know it's so easy for us to have.
Awesome. Well, one thing I know that is a common question that I also asked you in our first chat, and I think our listeners would love to hear from you. What is financial therapy?
Financial therapy really is about how you look at people's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors when it comes to money. And it's a process that hopefully will help you heal and get better about how you think and feel about your money, not only just your mindset, but also your relationship with mindset. Also your relationship with money too.
And what led you down the path of becoming a financial therapist?
So I have been a therapist for at 14 years at this point, and it wasn't until I was kind of going through my own journey of finance and trying to figure it out that I was like, you know what, I'm having some feelings about this. So that was kind of the beginning of what brought me to personal finance in general. And at first I was like, do I want to be a CFP? I don't know if I necessarily want to be a planner because I love being a therapist, but I knew that talking about money was really important to me. And then it wasn't until I found the Financial Therapy Association and Trauma of Money and the Center for Financial Social Work that I really was like, oh, there are people doing this. There are people talking about our relationship to money. So it was a little bit of both in terms of my own experience, but then also realizing how little people talk about it in general and that I could help, and I wanted to.
Yeah. I know one thing that really resonated for me was last time in our conversation, talking about all the feelings that can come up with money. I think especially if you grew up in a family environment where that wasn't normal. And I think for most of the past decades, actually it wasn't quote polite to even talk about money. I'm curious, as you've supported more individuals and couples in their journey, what are some of the strong emotions and feelings that can come up when talking about money?
So I think definitely guilt and shame are probably at the top of the list. Unfortunately, I wish they weren't negative feelings, but they're not the best. So guilt and shame, just wondering about confusion and how to handle some of these conversations. Like you said, people don't usually talk about money. It's very taboo and it ends up being very secretive and they don't even talk about it with their families. So then having the conversations with their spouses can be even more complicated. So a lot of negative feelings come up, but guilt and shame definitely are leading the pack.
Do you have any examples of times where you've seen guilt and shame come up in conversation, especially for couples?
Yeah, I would definitely say avoiding your money. So there might be one part of the couple that is avoiding the money. And a lot of times fear is also a part of that, or anxiety is a part of that too. But there can be a lot of shame when it comes to, I don't know what I'm talking about, or I don't know anything about money and I'm an adult and I feel like I should. And now I feel bad. So a lot of times people haven't taken the time to really dive into what they're going through emotionally to figure out where they're coming from. They just want to hide from it and feel bad because it feels exposing and it is vulnerable to talk about it.
Yeah. And for me, that's actually the craziest thing because we never learn about what to do with our money. There's no courses. There's very little content that, especially in the educational system, you can learn about how to calculate the area of a triangle, but you don't learn how to budget or how to invest. So it's so common that and normal, I would say, that you know, emerge and enter adulthood and you don't know what to do. But when you end up meeting individuals who feel all of that, what are some of the things that you do for in terms of exercises or conversations you have with them to help them work through this?
Yeah, a lot of the conversations definitely start at the root. So we're talking about your history with money, how you were raised, how money was talked about or unspokenly talked about. So like verbal cues or tone of voice that you might have seen or in and around you when you were growing up. And a lot of people don't think about it that way because they're usually like, oh, well, this is what this person said, or my mom mentioned this, or I heard my dad or my aunt. But it's also the other messaging that may not have been coming from where you lived or your internal family. It could be external from the media or things that you heard at school or just certain pressures that you may realize like, hey, it's really cool when this person's showing up in this type of car versus like, oh, well, this is how much that car costs and this is what it looks like. And, you know, all the intricacies that come with finances we don't really realize when we're kids, but we do hear about money in general. So where I start is usually about the history and the root cause of where their relationship with money began.
Do you have a few quick tips for people where maybe it's the first time that they're navigating, even trying to wrap their heads around where to start, or it's the first time a couple is navigating this together?
Yeah, so I am always going to be a champion of labeling your feelings and labeling them out loud to somebody, especially if you're in a couple. So if you want to have that conversation and don't even talk about the money yet, but just talk about, hey, it makes me really nervous to talk about money. I'm worried that you're going to think that I'm stupid or think that I made really big mistakes. So I am nervous to share some of this with you. So just labeling the feelings with your partner about what comes up for you is a great start. And if you are not in a couple or if it's just you and you're trying to do a little bit more of the personal development and introspection around your relationship with money, then I would say journaling might be really helpful. And think about a prompt that involves money. So some of those could be, how did I feel about money growing up? Or what is my first money memory? Just to start jogging your thoughts and your emotions around what comes up when you start thinking about money and let it flow freely. I think what happens so often to us is that we almost have this checks and balances in our brain that you have a thought and you're like, no, I shouldn't. And then you kind of replace it. I want you to just allow the thought to be and don't autocorrect to what you think should be the right or the wrong answer. Just flow with your feelings and be honest. So then you kind of can check in with yourself.
I absolutely love that in terms of facing your feelings and giving space to just see what comes out. As you know, one of the things we also think a lot about too is because money isn't spoken about, sometimes people have all these thoughts and feelings that can come up, whether it is, you know, some of these stronger feelings or emotions like embarrassment or shame. One of the things I'm really curious about to hear from you are what are some of the thoughts that are very common that people may have that you actually want people to understand it's a very normal set of thoughts or feelings to begin with?
Yeah, so I would definitely start with a little bit of what we have already talked about in that I felt like I should know already. I am upset that I didn't know better. I'm upset that nobody taught me this. So a lot of times we internalize what we do or do not know as if it is part of our moral compass when it really has nothing to do with who we are as people. So yeah, it would be great if somebody taught you about personal finance and education, but if they didn't, that's okay. And it's not really your fault. But a lot of times we take it on as if it is something that we did wrong, as if, when you're a kid, you're like, well, I need to learn about personal finance. No, that is taught. Understanding what's important in terms of how do you operate with money is something that needs to be taught. And if that wasn't a priority or it never came up in your family or in your circles, it's really hard to hold yourself accountable for it when you just didn't know. So that's definitely one of the biggest things that I hear. And also, feeling nervous. Like, what if I mess it up? It's okay. You can autocorrect with either systems or with people, and creating a system for yourself and your money, or a plan, is going to be helpful in terms of like, hey, we may have gone off the path a little bit, but we can come back. And that's really hard for people. They kind of want to get into the money game, if you will, and be investing and do everything right. And that's just not typically how people work in general. Like, we do make mistakes and it's okay.
Yeah. And would you have any tips for someone who might have that voice in their head, which is like, shoulda, woulda, coulda, like, should have done better? Is there any, tool that you would suggest to help catch someone at that moment when they're starting to feel the regret?
Yeah, well, it's really hard. So number one, it's going to be really hard because I suspect that you've probably been doing this for a while already, and potentially not just with your money. If you find that you have this negative voice that's, kind of being mean to yourself and kind of saying like, oh my goodness, shoulda, woulda, coulda. You're right. You can have that moment. That's okay. But after that, we kind of have to be a little bit kinder and give yourself grace to understand that, yeah, you should have. Yes, you could have. It would have been nice if you would have. But we're here now. How do we start moving forward and healing from some of those mistakes? And sometimes that means that you need to take a breath. Sometimes that means that you need to just give yourself grace and understand that you didn't know. And then it is, okay, what do I need to know now to do better next time? Do I need to talk to somebody to do better next time? Do I need to create a plan? What needs to happen so that you can feel better about this if, things get a little tricky in the future?
Yeah. And, one thing that I was also curious about was, especially for people who are starting off and they are worried that they're going to make a mistake, at least from the financial planning realm of things, how should someone even think about, the risk of making a mistake, or, the potential opportunity of actually taking action?
Yeah, I would say like dealing with the fear first, or the anxiety that might come up for people. What are you worried about? Like, what is the core worry? A lot of people will just say, hey, I'm nervous, I'm scared, but I need people to go a little bit deeper than that. What are you worried about? And a lot of times it is coming from, I'm scared that we won't be stable, or I'm scared that I'll be different than all of my friends around me, or I'm scared that I won't be able to relate to my community anymore. These are big core issues that we eventually get to when it's about them. It's not necessarily about the money. So really diving in and getting honest with yourself about where's the fear coming from? What are you really worried about?
Yeah. What are some of the common fears that you've heard and worked with specifically for people who aren't sure if they should invest or invest as much or invest in things that are, as risky?
Well, I tend to work with a lot of people of color, and our histories in the financial system are not the most positive, I think is the kindest way to put it. And because of that, there is a distrust in certain institutions, in certain banking institutions and financial institutions. So investing is definitely, I would say, one of the top fears and worries. And people are worried about the risk. They're worried that they're going to put in their life savings and it's going to evaporate. They're worried that they won't get it back. And sometimes being able to see your money feels more comfortable, even though you're not growing your wealth, even though your money isn't compounding or working, but you know it's kind of like safe. So for some people, safety and stability of knowing the money is there is better than the potential risk of it going up and down. And I am very much so set it and forget it person. Like throw the money in there. You are not trying to retire anytime soon because that happens to be the population that I'm working with. Now, what do we need to do to make sure that the emotions that come up while you are riding these waves are not having you checking your money every single day and feeling the anxiety of what the markets are doing?
Yeah. And I know one thing that you also mentioned too was how important it is to grow your money. Would you have a message for someone who maybe has a lot of money sitting in a checking account or a saving account that is earning almost nothing?
Yeah, move it. Move it now. Move it now. I tell my clients all the time that like we'll go through the process and go do, the process of financial therapy. We'll go through it to help them get to a place where they feel a little bit more comfortable investing. And if investing isn't the way that you want to go, that's okay. But at least let's move it into a high yield savings account so that something is happening. We're getting some motion and that your money's not just sitting there, in a regular savings account where it's not going to grow very much at all. So more important to do that until we are at a place where you feel more comfortable, and then happily recommend them to go talk to a financial professional who's going to be able to manage that, because that's not at all what I'm doing.
Yeah, makes complete sense. And actually with Plenty's cash accounts, you can earn a 5.1%, though that changes depending on the Fed funds rate. But part of also our mission there too is making sure that any money you do have works as hard as possible for you.
Right.
One thing that I would also want to hear your thoughts on is what advice would you have for someone who feels behind? I feel like there's this keeping up with the Joneses. It's easy to look around and be like, oh, this person, feels further ahead. Oh, they bought their house already. How are we still so far away from that point? And especially within a relationship, it's, I think, sometimes even harder too when you're trying to juggle, oh, well, I also have my partner's priorities. What advice would you have for someone who's kind of grappling with those emotions?
It's okay. And it's very normal, and that's fine. And yes, let's feel those feelings, but let's also ground ourselves in what you are doing currently or able to do now that you know, and now that you are trying to move forward. And I always try to combat comparison with gratitude. So it's really easy. There's always going to be more. There's always going to be somebody with more. It just is. And that's okay. But let's compare what you have to what you want. And I think a lot of times people forget or erase the context very quickly in where they have come from when they're starting to compare people. And I'm the first to admit that sometimes it happens to me too. And that very much so has been the advice that I've gotten in terms of it's really easy to look at somebody where you may not know the intricacies of their life and where they come from and just assume that this is what it is for them. And you make up a narrative for them versus you have no idea what's going on behind closed doors or what it took for them to get there or their family. We just don't know. So taking the time to combat that with gratitude and where you were maybe yesterday or last year or 5 years ago compared to where you are now and where you want to go in the future.
What I'm also hearing from that too is really focusing on how far you've come as part of that. So that's a message I also love a lot. As, couples are starting to talk about money, especially if it's the first time they've really dug into this, would you have any tips or guidelines or guardrails even, for couples who are starting to talk about this for the first time?
Do so without drinking first. And I say that because one, money is emotional. I know a lot of the past financial gurus have told us that money isn't emotional, but it is. And if you are also drinking during that time, emotions can run a little bit higher, and that can be really hard, and that can kind of break down communication. So if you are first starting to have these conversations, try to do so sober. I would also say try to do it with I statements. So I statements are starting with you and how you feel. I feel XYZ. I am XYZ. So fill in the blank. And that allows there to be less potential for blame or judgment on the other person, because again, money is emotional. And you're also talking about two very different or separate histories, and you're coming together to now be in one potential financial pool depending upon how you want to manage your finances. But that can get really complicated because the things that you are trying to attune to may may not be what your partner's attuning to. It might be in their blind spots. So just being open and being kind to each other and focusing on how you feel versus like, you are making me, you. Nope, nope, nope. We're just talking about I.
Yeah. I know, even for Channing and I, when we first started talking about money, it was hard and uncomfortable. Is that normal? Does that get easier?
It definitely gets easier, but it definitely is hard and it's definitely uncomfortable because it's also vulnerable and we don't always love to be vulnerable. So that could be anywhere from, hey, I have a ton of money in the bank, or I have a trust, or I have investments that have been put aside to me, to I have a ton of money in debt, or I have no investments, I have no retirement. So either way, that can be really vulnerable information to come together and share. So sometimes people are just like, ew, I feel weird. I don't know how to say this. And it's because money has been so secretive and taboo for so long.
I feel like one of the things too is also for each individual, sometimes they have beliefs that are formed as a consequence of how they grew up, their family, things they kind of grew along when they were adults, independent of your partner. Do you have any suggestions for exercises for couples to even just navigate and uncover what are some of these things that might be influencing your behavior today that you might not even realize is there?
Yeah, I mean, that's a harder one because a lot of times it requires the individual to do a lot more introspective work themselves. So when you're having a conversation with your partner, can you get there? Of course, absolutely. But you have to want to go to those darker, deeper places that happened years ago. And when I say darker, it's not to say that it's negative. It's just to say childhoods look very different for a lot of people. And sometimes bringing up some of those memories aren't always the most positive. And it's also very hard to talk about parents. And it's not to say that you don't love them or don't care about them, but there is a lot of respect around people's parenting choices. And it almost can sometimes feel for people like they're talking badly about their parents when they're talking about their history, when that's not the case. It's, it kind of is what it is. What happened is what happened, and how you felt is how you feel. And that can be really complicated for people. So again, it's very similar advice in terms of give each other some grace and know that this could be really hard for each person to talk about. And if you both grew up not talking about money, just talking about money, even without the histories, can be really complicated and hard for somebody to even just open up and say, okay, let's talk about money. This is what's going on for me. This is how I feel.
Yeah. And I think especially, it's probably more common than not that you have slightly different approaches to something.
Right.
Especially when it's, all these different parts of your lives and how you guys think about money. Do you have any tips for how to navigate, when you get to an issue, whether that is how you think about spending or what you spend on or what you invest in or how you think about planning? Do you have any tips when people do realize, oh, we're really different in this area?
Yeah, so I would definitely say having each person kind of list out where their priorities are. So it's okay if you're different, if you can also be aligned in what each person's priorities are. It can get a little bit more complex when we start thinking about how are we going to achieve these goals? What do we want our accounts to look like? Do you have a separate account? I have a separate one. Do we have joint? Do we have a hybrid of both? So that can be a little bit hard to navigate. But once you realize, hey, these are our joint goals, these are our individual goals, and how can we work together to make sure that we're getting there despite the fact that we both maybe spend different or save differently or have these different values? Can the other person still see where the other part of the couple is coming from, and then also respect it? I think what happens is that when people aren't respecting the vision or the goals that the other person has, it can be really easy to belittle them, even though it's important to them. And if that's their priority, it's okay. It doesn't have to be yours too, but you can figure out a way to move towards that priority together.
I want to double click on that a little bit because you mentioned having joint goals. You also mentioned having individual goals. One of the most common things we hear from couples is there's almost like this little voice where they're like, and we haven't fully merged everything. And I know that's what my parents did. And we hear that all the time. what are your thoughts on, the prior generation's approach to every single thing is fully joined right out the gate at marriage to what you're seeing couples do now, and especially what you think is healthiest for couples nowadays?
Yeah, and this is, this is how I think about it. I think it's important for everybody to have some of your own money. Some of it. It does not need to be all of it. It does not need to be hundreds and thousands of dollars. It can just be something. And I say this for a couple of reasons. So one, you should have some non-judgment spending. Like if that means that it's frivolous and your partner may not agree with it, that's okay because they don't have to worry about it. You have some money where you're just like, you know what? I really want this. Insert here, whatever it happens to be. So, for example, I'm New York City based and I work really close to Koreatown, and I treat myself to lunch usually like maybe twice a week. Maybe it should be once based upon what I'm trying to do, but sometimes it's twice. And I will send a picture to my husband. He's like, you are out having the best lunches alone. I'm so jealous. But to me, that is a guilt-free spend that I know that I had coming from my account. It's not coming from the joint, from the family account, and that's how we manage our money. But that feels great. Or if I want to get something for him or for the kids or for the dog or whoever, I know that I have some money to do that. And so that's one side of it, just being able to have the spending that you're not worried about. And, there are limits. Like I want healthy spending, but there are limits. And then the other side of it is, more around security and more around stability. Now, I know we would all love to believe that our relationships are always going to last forever and nothing is ever going to happen to them. And I want that for everybody. I really, really do. Unfortunately, we know with statistically and data that is not always the case. So I know that women have typically found themselves staying in relationships because they don't have any financial security outside of the relationship. They wouldn't be able to secure an apartment. They wouldn't be able to find different housing or leave. And this comes up with domestic violence as well, that people don't have the funds to be able to get themselves out of relationships. Now, that may not be your situation, but to have some money that you know that you could take care of yourself, say anything came up, is really important. So having, just a small little security fund, emergency fund, you call it whatever you want to call it. So that just in case, and this is for everybody, however you identify and you are in a couple, having some money separately is going to be important. This is not to say I want people hiding money. This is not to say that we're trying to push financial infidelity. But it is to say that it is important to have security. So I have my own. I hope my husband has his. I don't ask him what his number is. Maybe I will. But hey, you need to make sure that we know we're not going anywhere. He's also married to a therapist. So I talk about these things all the time. But just in case anything was to happen, I want to make sure that he has his own money and I have my own money to kind of continue life and not feel like everything is shattered.
Yeah. And, one of the things that I'd love to chat a little bit more about too is you mentioned both how it's healthy for you to each have your own money. How do you do that? Or what conversations and questions should you be discussing in order to keep things open and honest and transparent?
Yeah. So, I don't want to call it like rules or parameters, but that is a good way to think about it. So some couples will say, hey, if you spend over insert X amount of money here, can you just shoot me a text or let me know? Or they'll put the alert on the account like, oh, somebody spent over this much money. And my accounts before have been like, hey, did you make this charge of XYZ money? I'm like, who is that? I'm like, did you? What is that? Just to be safe and just to make sure. So that's how some couples do it. Some couples do it by percentages, like, hey, this is how much money you make. Put in your percentage. This is how much money I make. So I'll put in that percentage, or we're going to give ourselves the allowance or your play money in your own personal slush fund, if you will, for, your non-judgmental purchases. that could be a percentage or a certain amount of money, or you can kind of decide, but we know majority of the money is going into the joint account. And really the communication is there so that you're both building trust, and it takes time. Like, I want everybody to know that this is not going to happen in the first conversation, that you're going to both leave like, hey, here's our system. We feel great. If that happens, wonderful. I love that. Congratulations. Like, that's amazing. But it may take you some time, and that's okay too, to get to a place of, hey, I feel comfortable here and they feel comfortable there too. And we're both kind of going back to our financial priorities, moving towards the same goals.
Yeah. It definitely took us years, and also mirrored the fact that our relationship was still evolving too. We, during that time, got engaged, got married, new milestones, and what felt right constantly was changing too.
Totally. And I remember when we bought our house, we moved from an apartment in Brooklyn into our home. And that was a huge shift in like what was our rent into what was our mortgage. So we had to decide like, okay, our allowances or our slush money, like it looks very, very different now. And it looks different from even when we didn't have kids. And now we have kids. I'm like, we got to slash those, that slush money. I remember, and thinking back, I think this is going to it sounds so wild now. And, I was younger, so I felt like I needed more. But I think at the time I was giving myself like $350 a week. And that feels outrageous to me now. I'm like, what was I doing with all of that money? And this is coming from, one, a place of privilege that I was even making enough to do that, but two, to spend that much money. And now that it's just like not our lives at all, because we have 2 kids in daycare, and there's just like a lot more expenses in our life compared to when, we're just 2 young kids living our best life in Brooklyn.
Yeah, for sure. One thing too, for what we've also done with our funny money too, is I at least enjoy stock picking, which I would say I do with a very tiny percentage of what goes into investing overall, but I personally enjoy that. And Channing absolutely hates that. And that also is part of our, hey, you know what? This is not going to impact any of our medium-term goals or long-term stability. But if you get joy out of this, go for it. Right. I'm not even going to ask questions about why you picked what you picked.
Right. And that is a perfect example of how it can work, so that you still have the joy in doing that and playing with some of your money, but it is not in any way, shape, or form putting your household in jeopardy.
One thing too that we also saw was UBS actually had a study a couple years back, and it said almost, 95% of specifically females, felt regret when they were unexpectedly widowed or divorced. And that actually caused and triggered a lot of conversations for Channing and I, because sometimes actually talking about divorce it's all this like, you don't think this is gonna work, and like, are we nervous? Like, is there something wrong? Whereas actually one thing that was really helpful for us was to be like, what if one of us gets hit by a bus? We don't know.
Right.
Like, there's unexpected things that happen all the time. Would you also have thoughts for how couples can also navigate this conversation? Because even talking about the potential of divorce can be hard.
It's so hard, and it is emotional, and it is not to say you want to break up. Like, to be clear, when we're talking about these kind of conversations that do involve divorce, it's not to say I want to break up. It's to say, if this happens to us and if it is unexpected and we haven't planned for it, where does that leave both of us? And then to your point, if something happens or somebody gets sick or there's an accident or just anything happens, what do you do? And it happens all the time that a spouse passes away and that spouse controlled all the money. And sometimes people cannot get into their accounts because they don't know where they are. They don't know where the passwords are. They have no clue. And I do not want that for anybody. So it's really important to have these conversations. So you're like, okay, what are your wishes? What do you want? What do we want for our home? What do we want for our household? What is our estate plan? If that's where we're at in our life, to say, hey, these are my wishes for now, and let's update it as it comes. But if you are, suddenly in a position where you're dealing with huge medical bills, but you don't know where the money is, that is just further stress that you could have kind of tried to mitigate when everybody was healthy. So talk about it.
Yeah. There, especially I would say for prior generations, there is and has been a very big trend where one person, often the female, ends up being like, you figure it out, or like, you can just manage things. Would you have a message for people today where maybe they're at the point where they're trying to decide, hey, maybe I'll just let my partner handle all of the investing, or my partner handles, all of the money? Would you have a message for them too?
Yeah, please don't do that. And when I say please don't do that, it's less about like who's the person moving the money and who's the person controlling the accounts. Mm-hmm. It's not about control. It's more about, I may not be the person who's moving the money or making sure this percentage is going there, but I know what's happening. I know where our money is. I know what the accounts are. I have access to the accounts, and I know that this is the path that we're on because these are our goals. So please be involved in your money. You do not need to be the person who's tapping the screen or clicking the mouse to move and transfer and do all that, but you do need to know what's going on with the money. At least a little bit. And that could be through monthly money dates. It could be just having conversations. It could be like going over your budget. Whatever you want, whatever works for you is the best, but do not kind of hands off. You manage it. It's fine. We cannot do that. I don't care who you are.
And that doesn't mean they have to be equal participants in it, right?
No, my husband 100% is not an equal participant in our money. Like I care about it in a fun, different type of way than he cares about it. And I'm like, hey, I'm just letting you know, and I will communicate to him, hey, I'm doing this and this is what's going on with that, and blah, 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 blah. And I have this whole thing that I'm doing. And he's like, wait, what? I'm like, you need to pay attention. This is important. You need to know. So even if the partner who is not managing the money, I would encourage them to bring it up and have these conversations. But the partner who is managing the money, if you find that your partner's not bringing it up, you bring it up to them and just say, hey, let's be on the same page. Let's communicate. I want you to know this is what's going on with the money. And that can look very different if people have completely separate accounts and kind of split everything 50-50. But you got to that place as a conversation as well. So let's just continue to have them.
Yeah. And one of the things that we've seen as, such a big unlock for a lot of couples is whether it is money that you have in your own account that you want your partner to be able to see, whether it's in your private account, whether it is joint accounts that you share together. We think it's really important, whether you use Plenty or other place, it's really important to have one place where you can at least see what you have together and also what you have on your own.
Yep, exactly. I agree.
Final thing here. Thank you so much for all the tips and advice. I've so thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with you. I have a lightning round, a few quick questions.
Okay, I'm ready.
So first question. What is a recent purchase that is less than $100 that has dramatically improved your life?
Oh, that's a great question. I am in the midst of a wardrobe purge, if you will, and I have decided that matching PJs are what is my new brand. So I got some matching PJs, and I didn't realize I had so many, and I love that for me. But I also realized I'm like, okay, we're good. So I bought some matching PJs.
I love that. Find joy in all moments. What is a bucket list experience that you and your husband have?
We went and ate at Noma.
And for people who don't know about Noma, can you tell us a little bit more about Noma?
Yes, I was going to say, so Noma has been rated the top restaurant in the world before. It is in Copenhagen, so this is like a whole trip. And it's just, I think it's phenomenal. We both really love food, and it is an experience where they grow a lot of the food like on the premises and experiment in different types of ways. So to be able to get a reservation is like the gauntlet. But we got a reservation and we went with a couple of our friends, which was just like a bucket list, amazing experience. I cried, which is not the first time I've cried over food before, but yeah, it was great.
I absolutely love that.
Yeah, but we saved. It took time. Like that was a whole thing. Like it was not a quick, hey, let's go here. No. This was like months in the works.
Bucket list experience, indeed. Final question. What is something you're looking forward to in 2024?
My book being published. I am very excited that my book will be out later this year, hopefully I think in the winter time. So that's the goal. But yeah, to this beautiful labor of love for the book to be published, I'm really looking forward to it.
And can you give us a quick preview of some of the things that you talk about in your book?
Sure. So it pretty much kind of walks you through the journey of understanding your money. So what the psychology is around humans and how that interacts with our money, as well as history. And it's mostly focused on American history and how that impacts us. And not just from the societal nationwide history, but also like our internal family systems history as well. So that's really important. And then it kind of talks about some common trains of thought that people may have with their money and a little bit of personal finance education around like, hey, if you find that this is you, what can you do to help?
Well, I'm very excited to read the book. Thank you so much for putting that together to normalize all things money in life. And so thank you again for coming onto the show. And I'm excited to also share links. And once we have your book linked too, I would love to share that also as part of our show notes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
All right. Have a great day. And for everyone listening in, thank you so much for tuning in.